All right. Welcome to everybody here in the room, and also welcome to our Zoom room. I'm particularly happy that Katharina Streit and Dr. Felix Höflmayer are here tonight talking about the latest excavation at Tel Lachish. Before I hand over to them, I want to tell you that we record this lecture, and if you are super excited and you want to listen to it again, you can on our YouTube channel. And if you want to come to more events like tonight, just tell us, subscribe, follow us, and like us. I'm sure that everybody in this room knows Katharina and Felix. However, the good old tradition is to introduce both of them. I will start with Dr. Katharina Streit. She, in fact, started her archaeological career by studying in Freiburg, prehistory and medieval archaeology. She then moved to Oxford University for a BA, and it's very interesting because there she got her training in radiocarbon dating and stable isotope analysis. So this is already very early where she got acquainted with that part of archaeology. She moved then for her MA to Jerusalem, where she studied at Hebrew University, where she also received her master's from, and also a PhD in 2016. And her thesis was on cultural interaction between Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Egypt in the 6th millennium BCE. This PhD thesis was published in a monograph in 2020 under the title The Engineered and Transregional Perspective, Material Culture and Exchange between Mesopotamia, the Levant, Lower Egypt in the 6th millennium, so very broad interest of Katharina. During her PhD, she was also leading the excavations in Ain el-Jarba, an early calculated site in the Jezreel Valley. She is currently a postdoc at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and she's also leading a leading figure in the research project Tracing Transformations in the Southern Levant from Collapse to Consolidation in the mid-2nd millennium. So she really covers a very broad chronological range. Thank you. Since, and this is most important, 2017, she is co-director together with Dr. Felix Höflmayer the excavation at Lachish. Dr. Felix Höflmayer is also here, and he will be also, I think Katharina is mostly taking over.
We flipped a coin and I lost.
So Felix has a background in classical archaeology and Egyptology. He studied at Vienna, where he also received his PhD from in 2010 on Minoan and Egyptian chronology. That was his research in the PhD, and the PhD was published in 2012, so only 2 years later in a monograph. And the title is in German, but it's more or less synchronizing the Minoan Old and New Palace periods with Egyptian chronology. Right after the PhD, he was an assistant and then a researcher at the Orient Department of the German Archaeological Institute, first in Amman, Jordan, and then in Berlin. He spent 2 years as a postdoctoral researcher at the Oriental Institute in Chicago. And then in 2015, he became first a fellow and then a group leader of the Levantine Archaeology faculty, let's say, at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, where he is still based. Apart from excavations in Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Felix worked for 6 years at Tel Lachish in Egypt, and he moved then over to Aqaba in Jordan, and was in 2013 also running the excavation in al-Jarba. 2017, and this is the most important part here, he became co-director of the Lachish excavations. Very important for our fellows, also Felix was an Albright Fellow in 2016, here at the Albright Institute, also working on chronological questions. And this is one of Felix's expertise, really. You can see that in a number of really relevant articles and also on edited volumes in chronology of the Southern Levant, Egypt, and of course, radiocarbon dating. Enough from my side. Thanks again for being here and enjoy the lecture.
Right, many thanks for joining us here in person and also those who are joining us online. Without further ado, I will start telling you a little bit about what we have done in the last 4 years at Tel Lachish. A short outline, what you have to expect in the next 45-50 minutes or so. I will say a few words about Lachish in general. The site doesn't need much introduction, I'm fully aware of that. A little bit about our specific research questions and aims. A few words about what we have done in area S and then in area P. These are our two current excavation areas, a couple of conclusions and outlook for the next years. The site Tel Lachish, around 60 kilometers from Jerusalem, 30 kilometers from Jerusalem, 30 from the coast. I used to say just over an hour drive from Jerusalem. I'm sure it's more an hour and a half or two probably in the future with the traffic. This is our wonderful site. Depending on where you measure, on the top or rather on the bottom of the tell, you have something around 12.5 hectares or a little bit more. And the elevation is something like 25 meters over the surrounding level. The site is settled somewhere from the Chalcolithic to the Persian period, on and off throughout the years. We are, of course, neither the first nor the last to excavate there. I'm sure this tell will keep many generations of archaeologists very busy. The first excavation at the site was in the 30s. You are all aware of the Wellcome Marston archaeological expedition led by Starkey and later published in these 4 wonderful volumes by Olga Tafnel. You will see a little bit more on that later. Then there was a short project by Hebrew University by Yochanan Aharoni before he went to Tel Aviv. And then the big project, I would say the best of the 70s, 80s, and the 90s by Tel Aviv University, directed by David Osishkin, and they left us wonderful volumes, which are still very essential to us today. Between 2013 and 17, Hebrew University and Southern Adventist University excavated there by Jossi Gaffinke and Michael Hazel, and they have, at least part of the team has returned last summer, and I understand that they will continue with some work also in the winter. In 2016, there was a short but a very focused project by the Israel Antiquities Authority, which exposed the second part of the gate. So when you're visiting the site, you will see the results of their work with conservation by now and the roof over it. And since 2017, it's Felix and me on behalf of the Austrian Academy of Sciences at the site. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the earlier projects, but I would like to mention a few things. This early excavation in the 30s by Starkey attracted a lot of attention. Mainly the murder of Starkey has recently been discussed in a couple of papers. And the project was run by mainly 3 students of Petrie. They called themselves the Petrie pups. And they continued and upgraded, I would say, a lot of Petrie's work. This, of course, is James Starkey, Olga Tafnel, and Lancaster Harding. I will mention him in a moment. He's actually quite a key figure. And Charles Inge was part of the team for short of a time, but there were some fights within the team. It's actually quite interesting to go back and reread their letters and reports, etc. They left us a lot of wonderful material in a range of archives. And one of our projects right now is to go back and find and trace all these, both archaeological finds and documentation. There's a lot of it, most of it in the UK, clustered at the British Museum, but also at a couple of other collections. And I'm only now trying to kind of trace back how much material is there, where is what can be used for reanalysis of older finds, etc., etc. While they have published in 4 wonderful volumes, we shouldn't forget that this was the state of art at the time. And essentially, we just see the tip of the iceberg. So I strongly believe that there's still a lot to be gained from these earlier excavations if we know how to approach that properly. I shortly already mentioned Lancaster Harding. In course of these reanalyses of the older material, I stumbled upon a veritable treasure chest, which I wasn't aware of, and I think many archaeologists were not aware of. Lancaster Harding brought to the excavations in Tel Lachish and in Lachish one of these little cameras. They're called Pate Baby. They came out in 1922. They are little handheld cameras, all mounted on a tripod. They were released to the market in 1922 and cost back then 595 francs. I looked up what that was roughly. That seemed to be something like a month and a half of workers' salary. So they were reasonably affordable at that time. And he brought his camera with him and started filming. And Lachish is one of the few sites that we have actually quite a bit of film material on how these people worked, on life in the camp, etc., etc. And I discovered that UCL had, the university inherited this collection, started a project called Filming Antiquity by Mara Thornton, and they are starting to digitalize all these Pathé baby canisters. And that is not an easy task. They are digitalizing all of it, and I managed to get hands on, I think, 45, 50 minutes of the footage just of Lachish. And this has already initiated a couple of people, in this case, a filmmaker, to make a 15-minute documentary, in this case, highlighting the queer history of British researchers in Palestine by a researcher called Rob Eagle. He's now at the University of Western Anglia, I think. And when you look at this footage, it gives you a completely new take on these early excavators, which I only know by names from reports. So one of the very nice things is that you see their personality and their goofiness. So I bring to you the semi-shaven Starkey. This is one of the cutest shots that I have seen in the material, and we're now trying to reconstruct where what was taken, which work do we see, which phase of the excavation is depicted in these films. So this is just a side note. This will take a while for us to go through this material in detail. What our ultimate aim is to really get a full understanding of the British excavation. The publications are very good for their time, as I already mentioned. The plans are pretty good in themselves. They're reasonably accurate, but it isn't easy to locate them in the space because their grid wasn't, I would say, not as accurate for the big distances. It was actually really good for the time, but one of the things is now to go back to aerial pictures, try to connect it to modern plans, etc., etc. So this is just a snapshot of our work already of locating all the cemeteries, which you see in red. And there's a lot of burial material which has barely been analyzed. Yeah, you see a little bit of, you see it in the reports, but there's much more that we can today do with this material. By the way, Starkey's excavation was so advanced that they even collected organic material long before anybody thought about radiocarbon dating. So this gives us new opportunities for the next years. Another excavation that I quickly want to mention is, of course, the Tel Aviv project. Here you see on the top left corner a photo of the team. And when we started in 2017, we all dragged them back that could visit us at the time, and we made them stand in front of the rampart as well for a shot. And that team is very important to us because we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are basically connecting to the Ostracon grid. You will see that a lot of our stratigraphic terms we continue and refine, of course, from the Ostracon work. And this is why we are very glad that we can still call them up. They come to the site and help us understand things that they still know from the excavation back then. Right, now a few words about our research question. We are forming a little research group called the Archaeology of the Levant at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Just Felix, myself, Lindell Webster, Agnes Wojciuk, and this is maybe also the point. If you're interested in working with us, you are broadly interested in the archaeology of the Southern Levant, approach us. There are different funding opportunities in Vienna. We can help you try to apply for grants, and we will be more than happy if people join us and we can have the group slowly growing, because I think this is good for everybody. Currently, we have a couple of projects running on. One is the Tracing Transformation project, which is slowly coming to an end. Einel Jarba, the publication is in its last steps, inshallah. Felix still has a project on the early Bronze Age archaeology and the chronology of that time. And he started a new thing on Vienna and the Holy Land, where we are looking at Ernst Zellin's material from Tanakh, Jericho, and Shrem, and trying to understand both research history and maybe publish the material that never came through for publication. And a very last project, which was funded very recently, called Turtle Chron. Yes, this is about turtles. Yes, it's about chronology. It's a project which I submitted. I would like to build something like a dendrochronology of turtle growth ring patterns in their shells. And if you know anything, I will be sending out emails soon on Agate, etc. If you have any turtle remains from 1000 AD to present, please email me. I would love to hear about them because I would like to put together a database, and hopefully in future we can not only date with dendrochronology, but also with turtle chronology. Right, the original idea or the original reason why we came to Tel Lachish was Felix's chronological question. This is about the end of the Middle Bronze Age, the beginning of the Late Bronze Age. When does this transition date, and connected to that, who caused the end of the Middle Bronze Age? I'm not going to go now into deep chronology debate. If you want to hear about that, ask Felix, and I'm sure in the next 2 hours he will be explaining all about it. But this was the original idea, and in course of a project focusing on this transition, we examined a couple of sites, but also Tel Lachish, and this is how we got started. Lindell was one of the most important people for the chronological question. She visited different sites in the area and sampled mainly sections with high resolution radiocarbon sampling, which were then submitted for radiocarbon dating, and was building these wonderful chronologies on the right-hand side. She finished her PhD in 2020. This is now in publication, and a bunch of paper came out as well. Yeah, maybe one of the main outcomes, we now know that the Middle Bronze Age has not ended at the same time. This was a longer process, and there's a significant overlap between different sites already having ended with the Middle Bronze Age, so to say, while others are still at it. A new thing that we brought this season to the site as a result of the Austrian Academy joining several departments, and we are now kind of forming the Austrian Archaeological Institute with 160 archaeologists, something like that, a very, very big department with excavations in different parts of the world. And one of the big advantages is that we can use the full infrastructure. So we can use professional photographers, conservators, and in this case also specialists on geophysical survey. So we had Franziska Reiner coming out with a geomagnetic surveyor, and we thought, well, let's give this a try. Typically, I have learned in my studies, geomagnetics doesn't work on tells and there's not much use of it. So like, why not give it a try anyway? We focused on very flat areas of the tell, which we thought were quite accessible. It required physically cleaning at least the biggest shrubbery on the surface. Not a very nice work, but had to be done so that she can comfortably walk with her survey machine over the terrain. This is Franziska with her equipment. And we are getting first results. This is pre-processing. This has still to be run through filters, etc. For me personally, as a non-geomagnetic person, this all looks like a pregnancy sonogram, so to say. But she swears that there are definitely structures which are not just metal on the top surface, like these things you see are definitely metal packs, we know about them. But surprisingly, the surface of Tel Lachish is not that contaminated as we feared. And there are structures coming out, and we are really looking forward for the next weeks to see what she can tell us about the geophysical survey. Ideally, in future, we would add a georadar, and when you combine two methods, you can get a much better picture. Now onward to our two excavation areas. This is excavation area S on the western side of the tell, and area P. These are currently the focus of our work. This might change a little bit in future as well. We have not excavated the last season this year in area S, but of course the research continues. And this is what I will be presenting you now. This is what we have excavated in the last 3 years. We have a very monumental building which continues into the northern sections. Murphy's Law, always the cool buildings go into a section somewhere from the late Bronze Age. And this building is very rich, and the rooms attached to it from the south are very rich in finds. These are a couple of the highlights. I will be going through them one by one, but just that you have a short impression of what kind of material we are looking at. I will start with a few words about the scarabs, and you can't talk about scarabs without mentioning the stamp seal of the Southern Levant project, funded by the Swiss National Fund, which of course is an extension of these wonderful publications that we all know, the big corpus of the Stempelsiegel Amulette. And this project is now continuing, not only continuing it, also turning it into a digital format, and not only digitalizing it, but in the end, there will be a tool which also helps to analyze spatial analysis, historical analysis, chronological analysis of the stamp seals. We had a week ago a wonderful lecture where Stefan Münger presenting the option on the potential of this tool, and we're quite excited to hopefully see this very close. We of course showed him our little scarabs, and one that he got immediately quite excited about is this so-called Hyksos scarab. You see a goat looking to the back. I think this everybody can see. A snake, some vegetal motif, and something which is apparently a vulture. For me, it looks a little bit like a Thanksgiving turkey on its back, but I have been convinced that this is a vulture. It is from a floor, from a pretty good context, actually from an excellent context. We can date it to the early mid-15th century based on radiocarbon dating. The context was sealed from the top and from the bottom, so we are quite confident about that one. And this type of scarab doesn't have a one-to-one equivalent, but this combination of motifs is apparently very common. So these caprets, and we're either looking to the front or to the back. Vultures and similar animals are quite known. And there are two examples from Lachish also which pick up these motifs. So they kind of belong into a general family of iconography that is quite known. The second example is this scarab, a little bit smaller, showing a mud feather, a nap on the bottom, and a Horus falcon standing on, and this scratch, you have to believe me, is a cobra snake. And this as well comes from a very good context, early middle 15th century. They were found close to each other. And this one even has a pretty much one-to-one equivalent from Chatzor with this wonderful scarab and a couple of similar ones from the general family. So this you can date quite safely to the 18th dynasty, a very nice piece. And the last one that unfortunately did not come out of the context, but still I would like to show it to you, is this little carneol scarab, apparently belonging to a group called the Cornelian and red jasper scarabs with cross design, because they all have these sort of crosses and grids, and sometimes even without any markings on the bottom. There's a wonderful paper by Vanessa Boschloss on the topic, and something that you can, for example, do with this future database and research tool on stamp seals is to plot in which periods are these materials particularly common. And you see that these carnelian scarabs are very popular in the late Bronze Age, which is probably also the date of our piece. But again, unfortunately, out of context. Now, to a second group of finds, which has attracted quite a bit of attention, particularly this little shirt with an inscription. The red dot marks the spot where it was found, just south of this late Bronze Age building. This is what it looks like from both sides. The pottery people among you immediately identified as a milk bowl inscribed on the inside. It was identified while excavating in the field, not later in pottery washing. Was actually found by Lindell Webster, our radiocarbon person, published in the meantime. It can be firmly ascribed to stratum S3. It's a separate white slip type 2 bowl, pretty small, 4 centimeters. And our main epigrapher, Chagai Misgav, suggests a reading of Evet, Nofet, and a couple of other not entirely clear signs, including this little hook in the middle, which we are not entirely sure about, but something along slave, honey, nectar, in that realm of words, we seem to be, we seem to have a reading. It can be firmly radiocarbon dated to the mid-15th century, which is equivalent to early 19th dynasty. And this, of course, was quite a big surprise. This is very early for what we would expect for Proto-Canaanite writing. The publication had, of course, a quite big resonance in wider media. It was Felix, when we thought about the title for it, we decided and settled on the missing link. And this is not just to make it a little bit sexy on the title, but actually we do think that this provides a certain missing link. We know from Lachish a couple of inscribed bowls with Proto-Canaanite writing, or early Hebrew writing. We have examples from the 12th century. We have examples from the 13th century. This vessel, of course, you know probably very well. But there was nothing really much earlier. Now we have our little shirt, and this makes actually what is always considered the earliest possible example of writing, this dagger at Lachish, which is dated to Middle Bronze Age, 17th century, makes it much more likely that it's that it's actually indeed writing and not just pictographs. So this is why we called it the missing link. And we're quite glad that the epigraphers were very excited about our little shirt. The second example has not yet hit publication. That's this little ostracon. Actually, it's a little bit bigger. It was found north of the wall, but in a stratum a little bit higher up. Also can be reasonably well dated, was also identified during excavation already. In this case, we were quite happy that we did identify it because the writing is much more faded and it's not as clear as on the Cypriot shirt. Yes, it's broken. Yes, we were horribly sorry, but we could glue it back together. It is also area S, stratum S2. That means a little bit higher up. It's a little bit younger. In the end, there were 3 shirts which could be glued together around 8 or 7 centimeters, and it can be radiocarbon dated to the late 15th or early 14th century. Again, we have quite a tight date on this. It thus falls in the pre-Amarna age. The inscription is very heavily faded in this case. This is where Michael Langlois could help us with multispectral imaging. And in this case, this really was worth it. In the Cypriot shirt, it didn't make such a difference because the ink wasn't faded to begin with. The reading in this case is also very difficult. The reading suggested by Stefan Wimmer, I will show you the publication in a moment. He translates and he says with a lot of question marks, a couple of names, Egyptian names and Canaanite names, Azan Ra, Yami. We have mentions of loaves of bread or rations, barley, sack of barley, 7 loaves from barley. So one of these typical lists of rations and names. We also have a Canaanite name, Ben Anat. And this is what is excited about this piece. We have a list of Canaanite and Egyptian names in the same document, which are locations of provisions. It is an evidence of early scribal practice with Egyptian involvement. The hieratic writing is of a trained hand. This is not somebody who learned it recently. And it's so far one of these 11 hieratic documents from Tel Lachish. So it's very clear that Lachish is quite of a center of writing at that time. It will come out shortly in Zeitschrift für ägyptische Sprache und Altertumskunde by Stefan Wimmer. It should be in press virtually right now. And this also makes a tiny little shirt with only 1 letter, much more likely, which was always, it was discovered by Osishkin, also in area S. And it was dated to the mid to late 15th century and was ascribed to S3. And it was like the earliest, a very small fragment. We all know that material can move. So this was always considered a bit uncertain. But now with our much bigger ostracon, this I think seems to be much more likely. And we know that hieratic writing starts in Lachish quite early already. Right, so if we look at this in a time scale, here are our 2 ostraca from the last years, and they join a group of later texts and an earlier dagger, and also give more of a context to this Papyrus Hermitage 1116a verso, correct? Yeah, which mentions the first mention of Lachish. And now we know that there is like a counterpart at the site itself. Yeah, and this is the little example from Osishkin. So to summarize for area S, if we go through the phases a little bit, in the earliest phase, 15th century from over here, S3 CB, we seem to have some sort of a fortification at the time. We are not entirely sure about it yet. We need to explore this a little bit further. In the next phase, we have our early Canaanite ostracon. Then we have the mention in the Papyrus Hermitage. Then we have our hieratic inscription and Osishkin's early hieratic find. And in stratum S2 and S1, we have these laminated layers. There's no architecture at the time. They're completely laminated layers of either burned garbage. We are not entirely sure about that. There are a couple of other sites which have similar phenomena. and this falls in the period of the Ella Madna letters. So now we can connect the archaeology of area S much better in the late Bronze Age archaeology in the entire southern Levant, thanks to this detailed radiocarbon dating. That was it for area S. We are now moving on to area P, which is located northeast of the Judean palace. We all recognize the Judean palace structure prominently on the Tel. This is what the area excavation area looked at the end of the season. I will now slowly take you through the different remains that we found from mainly the Middle Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Let's start with the Middle Bronze Age. The area and the reason why we came to area P was this blue structure, the Middle Bronze Age palace already excavated by David Osischkin. He found a palace structure quite extensive with at least two phases, one main phase, P4, and one reuse after a first destruction in P3. We expanded, it was excavated up to here, we expanded squares further to the east, trying to connect to his excavation and checking how far the palace expands, and of course also investing quite a bit into the chronology and detailed radiocarbon dating of it. So this is the structure we are looking at in this blue. The teal is a little bit of an earlier phase, this as well. I will walk you through that.
The palace is Bronze Age?
Middle Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age. And it sits beneath the Iron Age palace, which is on top. The Middle Bronze Age palace is quite well preserved, thanks to a destruction with quite a lot of fire. The walls are standing up to 1.50 meters, 1.60 meters tall, plastered. You see on the lower part, they are burned. So when the material collapses in, the lower part is burned quite significantly, but this also preserves, of course, the mud brick quite well. In some parts, the walls are disturbed with later pits, but in general, I would say it's good preservation and it's really a joy to excavate it. However, not always is the mud brick architecture that clearly preserved as in that case. So in this case, you see very easily identifiable walls. You see some plaster over here and here with a drainage in the middle. And then you see something like a wall over there, which we identified only much, much lower down. Again, not always identifying mud brick is as easily done as when it was burned by high temperature. And we are only now really feeling confident of identifying the mud brick with reasonable accuracy. Right, when you look at a mud brick in the field, you spend a lot of time cleaning and brushing. Sometimes you use also water sprayers. It's really not easily done. I brought you an example, which is actually quite clear on the right side. And if you stare at it for a while, it's a bit like a Rorschach test, you might be able to identify, I can go back for a second, this grid. This is what we get. This is as good as it is. And this is where Felix is training in Egypt, brushing and cleaning a lot of mud brick, and Tel Lachish was definitely very helpful because this took us a while to get accustomed to seeing this. Of course, the mud brick walls are surrounded by mud brick debris, so often you get chunks of mud brick, and then to identify where do we have walls and where is the fill is not that easy. The walls are, the floors are filled with fines. Actually, it's not that rich in fines as we would like it to be, but we have, for example, these stone vessels, Alabaston stone vessels, Cypriot imports, teleodia fragments occasionally, the Bronze Age jugglets, and very nice examples of Cypriot red on red bowl fragments, which are actually quite rare. So the finds are still very typical for the Middle Bronze Age and fit very well in the chronological range. I would like to draw your attention to this teal-colored architecture. This was one of the newer finds. This is the wall. We at some point decided to go beneath the floors of the Middle Bronze Age palace because we were, of course, interested, is there an earlier phase? If you have one palace, probably, or it's not unlikely that there would be something beneath. Lo and behold, we went beneath the floors and we got this very substantial wall. This is what it looks from the side. It's not yet floating. We see very clearly that it was cut, it seems to be cut at this point by the foundation trench of the later mud brick wall. But there's definitely an earlier phase to this palace in roughly a similar orientation with much more substantial walls. So we're of course curious, when was this built, and when do we get down to the floors of this architecture if they are preserved. The Middle Bronze Age dates into this phase around the destruction, depending on which destruction you're talking about, P4 and P3, somewhere 16th century, mid-16th century, pretty much falling in the traditional chronology. Felix was not entirely happy about that, but so is life. And this is, of course, based again on very detailed radiocarbon dating of sampling directly in sections and with very good contexts. Right, now let's move on to a new find. We were looking for the Middle Bronze Age, and we got a little addition in the Iron Age, which I was very happy about. It cuts into the Middle Bronze Age, sorry, but I think it's a very exciting find, which we were not intentionally looking for, but we are nevertheless happy about it. I'm talking about this structure over here. You see it curving. It cuts into the Middle Bronze Age palace structure, and it's not in orientation with the Middle Bronze Age. It's very clearly post-dating it. And when you look at the general plan with the Judean Palace and the Northern Annex building, you see that it's conspicuously in a very fitting orientation. That before we even start talking about chronology and dating, just on the architectural observation. We have, let's go back for a second. Let's go this way. Come on, sorry. We have a wall that is curving, and it's apparently closing on 3 sides. It's dug into the material. That means it's not freestanding, but it's like a structural wall, it's a seam. In the beginning, I thought it's a supporting wall that keeps the Middle Bronze Age material in place when they were building something on top, but it seems to be curving now, so it's really sunk into the ground. And it's abutted on the inside by these very flimsy mud brick walls. They're nothing like the Middle Bronze Age mud brick walls, which are very nice with equally sized mud bricks. Sometimes they're even completely preserved. This is much worse in preservation, but nevertheless, you see the lines of mud bricks on this picture. They go very deep down. We are not at the bottom of the stone wall yet, because we, for static reasons, had to finish excavating it during the season, and we have to continue it with, after lowering the bulks in the next summer. They are abutting the wall from one side. There was a second one, which we have unfortunately missed in its earlier courses, which is even plastered from one side. Again, this is much worse in preservation in the Middle Bronze Age. It's very, very hard to get any outline of mud bricks. We get often a feeling that there's mud brick material, but not always it's possible to catch it immediately. And if we look at it from the top, this is our stone feature. We seem to have 2 mud bricks at least, and further down, we don't know yet. And this one is plastered from the northern side, abutting these walls. What they are doing there, I'm not quite sure, but just to present you what we have at the moment. The fill is considerably sterile. There isn't much material in it. And if you look at the sections, you see that material seems to be washed in quite high speed. There seem to be events of quick sedimentation flowing in from the southern side, mainly to the north, like this. And the fill contains a lot of plaster fragments, partly even very big skulls, as chunks, sorry, not skulls. They have not yet been analyzed before you ask, but they are very substantial chunks of of plaster. So we are wondering how that is connected to the function of that structure. And in one part of the wall, if you look at it like here, you have even reuse of other stones. So I would like to draw your attention to this stone, which is there, and those with a keen eye will see that something is scratched into it. This is what it looks after it was cleaned, and this is one of the Senate boards. Actually, this example was also found in Lachish in the gate area. It has a board of 10 on 3 squares. 3 are marked with X's. Miki Savan published quite a bit on these Senate boards. Apparently, these are very typical, particularly for the early Bronze Age, but they appear again and again, even until the Iron Age. So this was a very nice find, of course, in secondary use as building material. Of course, how does this date? So I'm presenting here a very first glimpse. Felix is a Middle Bronze Age person. I have done a little bit of Iron Age research before I excavated Chalcolithic as well. I know a little bit about Iron Age pottery because I excavated with Yossi in Caiafa, but I was, of course, very happy that Zach Thomas joined us, who has clearly seen much more pottery than I ever will, hopefully, and helped us a little bit with the ceramics in the field and, of course, in the pottery reading. So these are very first glimpses of the material. I'm allowed to say that this seems to be all Iron Age 2A, 10th or 9th century. A lot of these shapes you recognize, of course, the burnish, the Ziadid Bareach, the handle shapes, the bowls, the craters, etc. And the question is, how can we define the date a little bit better? The context inside the fill seems to accumulate before the northern annexed building is constructed because the plastered floor goes over it. That is at least our current educated guess. If we accept Ussishkin's dating of the northern annex building as stratum 4, this would make our structure stratum 5. I have to overquote Zach Thomas, who believes that there's a chance that the northern annex building might be stratum 3. So this is still all in discussion. But it's very clear that it is Iron Age 2A, additional dates or more defined dates coming in the future. How do we interpret this building, or rather, what do we have so far? It's a major underground structure closed at least on 3 sides. It's heavily disturbed by later pits in this area where you see these squares with nothing in it. It's because they seem to be very large pits, unfortunately cutting into it. And one of the plans will be also to define these pits a little bit better because we can't really catch the edges of it quite yet. The building is continuing in that area. The later fill that accumulated inside contains a lot of chunks of plaster. There are partly plastered mud brick walls abutting it from the inside. It's very close in proximity to the hypothetical Palace A, which would be the square structure which forms part of the Judean podium, which Starkey and Yossi Garfinkel would like to have as stratum 5, rather Olga Tafnel and Garfinkel would like to have it as stratum 5. David Ussishkin disagreed on that. He believes this is a building phase within the stratum 4, but I'm just mentioning it that it's in close proximity and in the same orientation as that. Pottery is, as I already mentioned, Iron Age 2A, and the fill is generally, except for the pottery, very low in fines. And we have these events of washing in of material, very quick washing. And it seems to go out of use before the northern annex building was constructed. At least this is our hypothesis at the moment. So what do we have? How do we interpret this? At the moment, we have 2 suggestions leaning towards one. I think the most feasible explanation currently is that this is some form of an entrance to a water system. We all know that the water system of Tel Lachish was not found yet. We have the well in the northern corner of the Tel, but everybody agrees that this would not be sufficient for the entire city. Another option would be a very large public granary. And what do archaeologists do when they have ideas? Of course, the first thing is we look for parallels. So let's have a look at a couple of other sites. If you look at Megiddo, you have both a water system and a granary in this case. The water system is conspicuously also very close to storage rooms and courtyards, so we're at least in the right vicinity of where this should be placed. This is the entrance. We all know how a water system works. You have a shaft going down, and then it goes either down on the water table or to a spring. That would be considered a true water system. Sometimes you also use cisterns, then we wouldn't call it a water system, but it's the same concept. I would like to draw your attention to these sort of stone walls also leaning in. This is an example from Chatzor. I chose this picture because you see this oblong shape of the upper part, also built of stone. The example from Beersheba is probably even more convincing. Again, stone walls leaning in, supporting the shaft as it was dug down to the ground. And of course, we cannot talk about water systems without mentioning the recent excavations also at Tel Lachish and redating the water system there. Again, have a look, please, at the stone walls on the top and supporting the entrance to the water system. Now let's have a few conclusions and ideas for the future. What can we conclude after 4 seasons about the Middle Bronze Age? We have excavated 2 destruction events in the early and mid-16th century, which we can now date with radiocarbon dating very precisely. We can expand the palace structure. We know that it now expands further to the east, much further than was previously assumed. And with the Iron Age structure cutting into it, we don't know exactly how much further, but we will try opening a couple of squares in the south and testing how far the Middle Bronze Age palace extends. We have an earlier phase of an even larger structure, which we tentatively call stratum P5, loosely in a similar orientation. In the late Bronze Age, we could correct the late Bronze Age chronology for area S. Basically, we are shifting stratum S3 and S2 back by around 100 years. This is mainly possible because now we have precision in radiocarbon dating in the use of short-lived samples, which was not yet accessible to the Tel Aviv team. We have an exposure of very rich assemblages from this very major late Bronze Age structure extending into the north. We can now show with our 2 inscriptions that Lachish was a center of early writing already from the mid-15th century onwards. And for the Iron Age 2A, which we were not planning on, but still makes me very happy, we have this monumental subterranean structure, which tentatively we address as a water system. I'm very glad if looking forward to other suggestions of how we might want to see this. What are our plans for the future? We will be hopefully back next season. In area P, we would like to explore this earlier stratum a little bit more and extend the area and go further down beneath the floors of P4. We would also extend the excavation area to the east and to the south, particularly to the south, to define the extent of the P4 and P3 palace structure, and to continue excavating our quote-unquote water system, go down, see whether we get any floor levels or what lies beneath it. For area S, there it's very clear if you want to explore this late Bronze Age building, we have to start on top. The sections are very high. It's not safe to work there anymore. This would be a long-term investment. And this is one of the reasons why we are so excited that the Austrian Academy takes Lachish as a long-term project. And it's very clear that we will be spending a bit of time there for the years to come. So we can now plan a little bit ahead and decide where we would like to invest our workforces long-termishly. And then our additional plans, I would very much like to look back into the Starkey material. I think there's still a lot to retrieve from these earlier projects. And one way of doing it is cleaning sections and stratigraphically critical points, getting clean assemblages, taking radiocarbon dates and basically making more meaning or giving more meaning to these earlier assemblages published already in the reports. And one area where I would be very interested in doing this is south of the Judean Palace. There's a sequence of Iron Age domestic structures and other buildings, which I believe can be dated a bit more precisely if we use modern methods. And with cleaning sections and connecting to old excavations, I think we can gain a lot of new knowledge without destroying a lot of archaeology. We shouldn't forget that every archaeology, every excavation is always destructive in its essence. And I would plan to also make the Starkey documentation somewhat accessible, not only for us to easier use, but also for other researchers. In which way, on which platform we would be doing this is still under negotiation, but ideally we would have either GIS-based or similar platforms where you could zoom into different areas and make sense of the photographs, which currently are very difficult to connect to what you see on the plans. Would also like to revisit the collection themselves, not just the documentation, at the British Museum in the next year, and continue excavating and continue investing into the geophysical survey. There are different methods of doing this. Deep coring had also be brought up. So we are now testing what would be most suitable for Lachish. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention.